Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the weekly landscape update video we do here in the garden in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. Winding down here in September. Annuals are definitely, going to start slowing down a bit, but we've got some other things started that will go in the place of some of these annual pieces when they come out of the ground. Of course, perennials will, start to die back at some point, but some of them bloom right into the fall, and there are examples of that. Last week we showed asters in the front of the fence out by the road. Got farfugium in the back line in the shadier areas that will start blooming pretty soon. And then of course this goldenrod or solidago. This is one called Fireworks, which wears its flowers right up on the top of each of a kind of a weeping branch. Really beautiful plant. I highly recommend this one. It's been very vigorous in the ground. It went in last fall. Again, super vigorous. A lot of different varieties and incredible amount of species in this group, where they grow from Canada all the way down into Mexico, and they bloom, they start earlier up there, obviously, and you can probably follow them through the U.S. down through the entire country, but great for pollinators in the fall. And another one of those many yellow flowering things in the fall. It's amazing how many things you see that are native that are bright yellow in the fall. There must be obviously some sort of reason for that. Over to the left of that is this Philadelphus that was planted earlier this year, mock orange. Was planted earlier this year. This one's called Pearls of Perfume, and it's supposed to be repeat flowering, and it is. It is bloomed. It bloomed heavily in the spring. It was only this big. Okay, so it's grown quite a bit. And now it's continued to put buds on here and there, and new flowers come out on it. I would imagine next year it will be more reliable repeat flowering. That's typical of most things. I'm going to have to control the size a bit on it right here on the edge of the driveway. But one thing about this space that I'm standing in on the edge of the property, which I don't think we've ever shown other than when that mock orange went in the ground, was that Steph threw out some gourds that we had as decorations from last fall over here, and the gourds went absolutely crazy over here. And this is a photo of all the gourds that were picked off of this one plant that grew like wild, and it was on top of everything that was here. So all season long we avoided filming this because it was just a kind of a jungle, but we were picking gourds the whole time. I've shown camellias the last couple of weeks, some Camellias sasanquas that are just setting their flower buds. But I actually have one back here called Crimson and Clover. This is one of Bobby Green's introductions. Same thing as all the October Magic series. I showed Orchid 2 weeks ago, October Magic Ruby last week. This Crimson and Clover is his, and it is already about to open a flower. This was one of the things he had talked about in the video that I shot down at his place last year, was that this one is super early flowering. And the flowers that you get early on are a different color than the ones when the nights are a little cooler later in the fall. So it's kind of a red early fall, and then the ones that open a little bit later in the fall are a much darker kind of crimson color. And so it's super interesting. It is already more than 6 feet tall, which is also a weird, interesting thing with a Camellia sasanqua. They typically don't grow very quick. This limb will get cut down back into the plant because it's raised up pretty high. But regardless, I don't know that I've ever seen a camellia, put on a single piece like that long in a season. Even established ones don't grow that fast. So this one is going to be a little quicker growing, probably going to make it a great screening plant in the park shade area. But this one's Crimson and Clover. Again, this is one of Bobby Green's. The other two directly in front are also Bobby's. This is one of these is white shishi, and one of them is pink shishi. And I don't know which is which until they flower at this point, because they're so identical. These are dwarfs. You can tell by the branching on them is going outward, but these are just setting their flower buds, and so we'll see these where there's a lot of flower buds on them start to swell over the course of the fall, whereas this Crimson and Clover is already actually showing a little bit of color in the flower buds. But it'll be October before we see these white shishi and pink shishi in flower.
I'm up here in the front garden taking stock in the combination of annuals and perennials that we've got planted for this past season. One of the stars of this year and last year is this African basil right in front of me. Last year we planted 3 of them, and it was kind of insane. It was everywhere. This year we opted for just one, and it's still plenty big, but it's been just a beautiful addition, and also something that the pollinators absolutely adore. We wish we could collect all this seed and plant it next year, but the seed isn't viable, so you have to buy it as a plant or take cuttings and bring them through the winter. Such a beautiful addition. Coming right through it is salvia. It is called mulberry jam, and it's just beautiful, sort of magenta colored salvia blooming up a storm. Just beautiful. The perennials and annuals have done a great job in the front. I will say next year will depend on the perennials coming into themselves and being a larger part of the presentation. You can see the gomphrena still blooming up a storm in its blush pink to white coloring. Right behind the gomphrena is an autumn blooming salvia. It's called Emerald and Cream. And you can see the buds forming right now, and the faint purple starting to show up. Before you know it, it'll be full of purple blooms for some of the fall pollinators to take advantage of.
This is Summer Jewels Gerbera Daisy. This is one from the Southern Living Plant Collection. You see it's kind of a fiery orange. This thing does absolutely fantastic. I've not had that great a success with these in the past, but some of the newer ones are just really, really great. Foliage is really quite beautiful. One thing I'll say that goes a long way, most of the time when I see these, they're planted out in kind of open space, and I think it gets a little bit hot. This one is presenting its flowers out from the edge of all of these other things that are going on. So the vinca, the abelia that's behind it. So all of these things are kind of surrounding it. So one thing you'll see in this garden that we're trying to accomplish is this dense planting where these perennials are coming up, and the shrubs are kind of always here, but the perennials are coming up in them, and then the annuals are kind of tucked into the open spaces. One thing, you'll reduce your weed population, although there's a couple of weeds in here, but for the most part weeds aren't going to be able to do very much in a space like this. One thing we haven't shown this year, these are our amaryllis bulbs from last winter that we got from Color Blends. They bloomed in the house, stayed in the house through the winter, and then went into the ground in the spring, and have been quite vigorous in this space, and they'll be fine. They'll survive the winter without any problem now that they're well established. They're not out in a big open field. They're protected by the house, isn't far from them. Not a lot of wind going to blow through there. There's some Coleus that were planted early in the season with the red foliage, trying to put up a few flower spikes at this point. They haven't filled in all that much. I don't know that we've kind of ignored this side is not necessarily a place we pay the most attention to. They probably should have been. I think if we'd have cut a third back on them maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, they'd probably be a little fuller than that. That'd be my suggestion. But they still looking pretty good there. The Gray Ghost Elysium has some flower buds on it, and has had a flower or two on it here already, but there are a lot of flower buds forming on it. This one's called Gray Ghost because it has this almost gray blue foliage. Really quite striking. I really, really love that plant. There's a lot of Elysium in this landscape. That one's great. There's an osmanthus behind it called Apricot Echo. There's several osmanthus in this landscape, but this is an orange flowering osmanthus fragrans, and it will start flowering once the nighttime temperatures get cooler. So you'll be able to see these orange flowers on it as it gets a little bit later. It's in a bit too much shade during the summertime. This is a kind of a shady spot, but it's going to get a lot of winter sun. And when it needs it to produce those flowers, it's deciduous shade, so it'll be in lots of sun at that point. This anemone that we rescued from a moving neighbor's landscape is just finally starting to open some flowers. It's kind of been a funny year for this thing. It came up, we showed it in a video, budded, and then a deer came along and ate it, and now the flower spikes have come back up again on it. Behind that, a lot of these dahlias that we did from seed, which I think we've shown a few of them, but more and more of them keep opening up back here, and they're so tall they're flopping over, but there's just tons of them. And they look great. This is a part shade space, so they're stretching a little bit. They could be staked using the fence just to prop them up. It's no big deal. It's a big pop of color back here in the back of some shrubs. And then lastly, I'll point out that the Chinese Snowball viburnum is about to open up some flowers here for the fall. These will bloom heavily in the spring, and this one almost always repeat blooms in the fall with a few less flowers. Typically, it's very close to this clethra that's next to it, but it'll eventually be a tree. I'm going to just limb this up into a tree above it. So right now it looks odd, but in the future they'll figure it out. That's what we do. A lot of our landscape design and gardening is it'll figure it out.
I'm standing here in the corner of the vegetable garden in an area where we kind of planted some plants that we didn't know where we wanted to put them yet. These are plants that we quite honestly tried to kill them before we actually even got them into the ground. We got them in different areas of the country from some incredible plant professionals and drove around with them in the back of the car for quite a while. So they weren't exactly treated kindly before they made their way to our beautiful oasis here. We got one of the gingers from Bobby Green. We mentioned the camellias in the front. Bobby Green gave us this gorgeous peach-colored ginger that he had in his yard. He just plucked it out and handed it to us, and we carted it around the southeast for a while. So fortunately, it came back. It's right here. We also went to Ram and Tom Gibbertson's house. Hopefully you've seen those incredible videos of their landscape. She gave us 3 different gingers. We proceeded to drive around the world with them before we were able to get home and get them into the ground. There also is an iris from Dr. Michael Durer that I honestly forgot I put here, and knowing that at some point soon I would find the place where it needed to live. But I walked over here and I was like, oh my goodness. So we do have to find a place for that that's a little better than tucked into this corner. Oddly, we planted them kind of towards the end of the season last year, and so they died back, and we kind of forgot they were here. Covered them with wood chips, and then one day I noticed that there was ginger coming up, and I was like, oh my gosh, it made it through all the wood chips. So I had to dig the wood chips out from around them so they would actually have a chance of becoming as beautiful as they are now. And you know, quite honestly, I think they're going to stay right here because it seems to be kind of a pretty lovely place for them.
I'll finish this week's tour up by talking about one last camellia. This is a Camellia japonica. All the camellias that I've been talking about for the last couple weeks, 3 weeks, have been Camellia sasanquas because it's almost Camellia sasanqua time. They're the fall blooming, traditionally the fall blooming camellias, and the Camellia japonicas normally bloom here in my area in Raleigh in zone 7B. They'll typically start blooming January if we have warm nights, but more typically February and March, except for this one. This one's called Early Wonder, and it is budded up like crazy. This one is the longest blooming Camellia japonica that I have ever seen. It will start blooming about the time most of the other Camellia sasanquas start blooming, other than that crimson and clover that we looked at in the front garden, but it'll start blooming very early in the fall and will just continue to bloom. This thing bloomed right up through March last year until we had this really nasty freeze in the middle of March, and it took a little bit of a hit from that, but it recovered beautifully. It's put on 6 or 8 inches of growth. It's just loaded with flower buds. I expect this thing to be blooming from about the 2nd week of October probably until well into March with really almost perfect double pink flowers. And it looks great contrasting over here with this Florida Sunshine Elysium that it lives next to. So Thank you guys for following along with these weekly landscape update tours. We'll be back next week with some additional things that we think are looking good, just on a week-to-week basis. It always changes, and hope to show you some things we haven't shown in a while each week. Thanks for watching.